Guys, welcome back to another episode of the Mind Muscle Connection podcast. Today is a solo episode, and I have a topic I want to dive into. I want to go over some things that your body is telling you, and if you're not ignoring these signs, you could be making fat loss and muscle gain tougher, especially as we get into our 30s and beyond. So we'll dive into some things, some common symptoms that I see, and what it may be telling you there. Before I do that, though, just want to go over my body recomp checklist. Again, this is completely free, so I go over 10 things you need for body recomp. Go over what is body recomp, why it's important to focus on body comp over just scale weight loss, the two different types of body recomp as well too. And then again, those 10 things there and much more. If you want to check that out, the link to that is in the show notes. Just make sure you grab that. So with that out of the way, let's dive into today's topic. Again, ignoring these signs. A lot of times what I see here is most people have no idea what their body is telling them. And especially in today's world, it's just easy to ignore the signals your body is constantly sending. We're just very out of tune with that. It's so easy to get yourself distracted, to just go through day to day thinking that, hey, I feel fine and nothing, I just feel fine. Or again, we're just very disconnected with how our body feels. And so it just becomes, this is a standard and like, that's your standard baseline. But really, we're not feeling great a lot of the time. And one of my caveats here to this is we don't have to feel amazing every single day. You're going to have some days where maybe you don't feel your greatest. Motivation may be a little bit lower, whatever it is, that's going to happen. They're not saying you need to feel perfect, because I think we can get very neurotic with this if that is what we're chasing, right? But we can use some of these signs as, hey, I need to dial in certain aspects of what I'm doing if I'm consistently seeing that, right? And even one day, if you are feeling it, I think this can also maybe help you figure out why that may be. But again, in today's world, it's just super easy to ignore these signals, right? We can distract ourselves and we just have so much on our plate that we just go through day to day, just pushing through all the time. And I do think there is a little bit of, hey, we need to push through at certain times. And again, not everything is going to feel perfect. But one of my goals with my clients is to get them to start to pay attention to these things more, because again, if these are off, this is definitely a sign that our body is not in the greatest spot to want to lose body fat and build muscle, right? It's more in survival mode than it is like, hey, let's make positive change here, there. But again, our body's always communicating things to us. And I think a lot of times too, with any of these things, whether it is thyroid issues, hormone issues, there's all things that we're doing that are causing those issues, right? Our body's just adapting to what we're doing to it. And you don't have a thyroid issue just because you have a thyroid issue, right? Even something like autoimmune. Yes, some people are going to be more predisposed to things, but a lot of these do have lifestyle factors that's, again, based on what we've done. And again, maybe you thought you were doing the right thing, right? We'll go over some of these, and that led to some dysfunction down the line. Or again, for you just have a higher predisposition to it. And so you have to be on top of things even more, right? I feel like I have this conversation a lot with people where, some people, yeah, you're going to see someone else and they can do something and they're going to go, for one, you don't really know what they have going on, how they got there, what they're going through. But on top of that, yes, some people are just going to be able to maybe make changes a little bit easier than you and be able to get away with things, whereas you have to be more intentional. And that's just the unfortunate truth there with things, right? And that's been a real realization for me, is now that I'm a parent, I have other life obligations and things. I was like, I just have to really be intentional day in and day out with my recovery, unfortunately. And even then, it's still, I feel like I have some wiggle room to improve there. So again, every one of these biofeedback markers can usually be traced back to one and usually all of these three factors. So it's going to come down to three things here. And again, these are biofeedback markers that I'll usually ask clients about, or at least we'll look into on there. And the first one is, one of the three factors is going to be too little or too much exercise. Again, this is relative to your recovery and nutrition. This is, earlier I mentioned, you may feel like you're doing the right things for you. For example, something like too much exercise, like this can lead to some potential issues if we're not recovering and our nutrition isn't great. It's not that more exercise is bad. It's not that more exercise is better. It's all relative to what you can recover from. And again, what you're doing in your training matters as well too. If you're just randomly trying to burn the most calories every single time you train, well, and again, I think you are going to run into some potential issues there. But at the same time, too little exercise, too little movement is also problematic. So it really is finding that Goldilocks zone for each person and what that looks like. And then sometimes, again, with some clients, you have to work within constraints of they can't get as much movement as you would like. Again, it really just comes down to like, hey, we got two options here. We can go out of our way to find ways to add in more movement, or two, the other option is, hey, this is just a constraint we have to work within and we need to work around that, right? The number two factor would be poor lifestyle habits. So think of this as things like sleep, circadian health, high stress load on the body, your environment that you're in, you spend time with, right? That would be the second bucket here. With this, it would fall into the lifestyle habits. So again, same thing here. This is a very common one for people that do tend to like to exercise a lot, are into fitness. It's like they obviously train enough, but again, they start to tip it into too much exercise for with poor lifestyle habits. These are things that usually have the biggest wiggle room for people where they feel like they're doing things right, but there's some things that may be impacting this, right? I always find there's at least, so for that avatar in particular, one of the things I mentioned was a high overall stress load on the body. Usually someone that's really into fitness, really into exercise, they push themselves. That's usually things where elsewhere they're doing the same thing and they don't recover very well. And so they have this high stress load on their body. And then on top of it, maybe they're also like eating, trying to restrict food intake. So they're in some sort of a deficit, micronutrient deficit. And so now there's a higher stress load on the body, or maybe there's some gut issues going on, right? Which that would fall like, again, that falls into stress load on the body is gut issues as well too, right? So again, these poor lifestyle habits really do show up here on this, and they can, again, usually any of these issues we're about to go over, they can be traced back to this poor lifestyle habit. And then number 3 is poor nutrition habits, right? So this looks different again for everyone, because just because you're tracking your calories doesn't mean that your nutrition is on track, right? Just because you eat pretty good, that doesn't necessarily mean that you've nailed nutrition. There's, again, people within this category, there's overeating, there's low diet quality, there's micronutrient deficiencies, there's hydration issues, there's meal timing issues. It's not just, hey, you're eating too many calories, you're eating too little calories. That is a player into that, but there's also other things that we can be doing from a nutrition perspective that could be leading to some potential issues there. So again, all these can be traced back to this. So what I'm going to do is go over the common symptoms that I'll see for clients and what this can potentially be linked to and what are the most common things here. So key biofeedback markers to pay attention to. And this is actual like subjective things that you can, some of them are objective, some of them are subjective, right? So things like energy levels, that's obviously going to be subjective. Menstrual cycle irregularities, again, that is somewhat subjective, but it's also fairly objective as well too, right? Because it's like you're either having a regular cycle or you're not there. And I think it's on a spectrum too. One day where you thought your cycle was going to be 28 days, but it was 29 doesn't necessarily mean there's dysfunction, right? And obviously we know that everyone's menstrual cycle is different in terms of length and what that looks like, but there's some guidelines that we can work within there too. All right, so key biofeedback markers to pay attention to. Number 1 is going to be energy levels, brain fog, mood, motivation. Being constantly tired, having brain fog or poor mood, it's not normal. And that's definitely a sign that there's some sort of, again, it can be traced back to one of those 3 things if this is going on, right? And so this can often be linked to lack of movement for sure. And so if you're not moving enough, especially outside of the gym, this could lead to some brain fog. For example, maybe you train hard in the morning, but then the rest of the day you're largely sedentary. Again, that could lead to some brain fog, and maybe you don't feel as great as you typically could, right? And it's also going to be linked to poor sleep and circadian disruption. So again, circadian disruption and poor sleep is probably going to impact all those, right? And if your circadian rhythm is out of whack, like that's going to show up as lower motivation. You're not going to be as well rested. It's going to show up in terms of poor mood, right? We know that circadian rhythm disruption can impact someone's mood. It's going to impact brain fog. Like you may just not be thinking as clearly. And it's also going to affect your energy levels, right? You're just not getting as good of sleep there. Again, high stress load on the body. We just have a lot going on, right? So again, this high stress load on the body it's many different things. It's not just, hey, you feel stressed. Again, that will definitely impact it for sure, where if you have a lot of psychological stress going on, that's going to impact your motivation. That's going to impact your mood. That's going to impact your brain fog. It's going to impact your energy levels. And then poor nutrition too, right? Again, poor nutrition, if our meal timing is irregular, if we're not making good diet choices, we're under eating or we're overeating, again, that's going to show up for literally all these things there. So again, if we're consistently having low energy levels, and I would rate this as like you don't need to have a 10 out of 10 energy all the time, but it's like you're consistently under a 3. Let's go to scale 5 for all these. If you're consistently under 3, like that is a sign that we would need to look into one of these things essentially. And also one other thing that I would lump in here would potentially be high training load, right? So we talked about too much training relative to poor sleep, not like poor nutrition. But again, it comes back to like, that's probably the bottleneck, not necessarily the too much training in of itself, unless you just generally are just training like a madman. But most people don't have the time for that, especially when we're over 30. Like that would be something where truly training too much is probably going to be someone that's like a long distance endurance runner, right? That's where you really want to start to see it. If somebody trains 4 days a week, within training that most people can do, it's like probably a bottleneck from one of these things, not necessarily the training itself on there. But and then same thing with mood. If you're consistently under 3 out of 5 for mood, again, a sign that we need to potentially look into one of these things because they will impact all of these. And then even motivation. I mean, if you're just anytime you've been super stressed, your motivation toward training probably goes down. Your motivation to make good food choices goes down, right? So it is one of those things where it's like, is the high stress load the cause of it, or is it your poor nutrition leading to that, right? So again, I think that's where having a coach that can decipher that is super important because again, some of these are going to impact each other, right? Like poor nutrition obviously is going to impact your energy, but Also, because you're high stress, you're making poor nutrition choices, which is leading to that. So again, it is somewhat, they all can go together. Hunger and cravings. Again, some hunger and cravings are expected during fat loss or when training demands are high, but constant hunger or like escalating cravings are signs something else needs to be addressed. Okay. So when you're actively dropping body fat, we should see some hunger. That's going to happen. But if that hunger is always there, it's just getting worse and like just you cannot cure that hunger. Again, we need to look at common things are going to be inconsistent nutrition. So just winging, like just changing your meal timing, changing your meals. Like there's no consistency from day to day. It's just very random what you do from a nutrition perspective. Chronic dieting. So getting to being in it, trying to push an energy deficit, being in a low calorie state, getting lean, staying lean. Like these are all going to be things that are going to cause you to have some issues from a hunger and cravings standpoint. Circadian disruptions, dysregulated circadian rhythm will certainly impact your hunger and cravings. So we'd want to look into that. And then elevated stress as well too. So stress, if you have high psychological stress or again, just high stress load on the body, you're likely going to have more hunger and cravings, at least hunger and cravings that are dysregulated for what we would expect. But again, you can't underestimate the impact of the inconsistent nutrition, right? So an example of that would be, hey, someone's breakfast is coffee with a bunch of creamer or sugar or whatever it may be with some sort of just high carb thing that's just basically carbs, right? Or let's take like a couple cookies or something like that. It's like, yeah, you're probably going to have like that's the issue, right? Or again, inconsistent meal timing where you maybe don't eat until 12 p.m. and then you eat it, then you snack for 5 hours and then you don't eat for a little bit and then you eat a large meal at 8. It's like, yeah, that inconsistent meal timing and meals and nutrition is definitely going to be a thing that would be causing the hunger and cravings there. And then also, again, inconsistent nutrition and like that example I just gave there of the person that was eating randomly, like that can start to disrupt your circadian rhythm, right? And that can put some extra stress on the body from like a blood sugar standpoint, right? So again, all these things do go hand in hand, but again, definitely a sign that we would want to look into something here. But then also body fat levels too. High levels of body fat in poor metabolic health is going to lead to dysregulated hunger and cravings. This is where something like a GLP-1 really does help for people with higher body fats because that system is all out of whack. But then again, I mentioned this under the chronic dieting, but very low body fat percentage. Again, that's a low body fat percentage for you because there is a little bit of a variability on where this is going to show up. But again, that can be something that impacts hunger and cravings. So another thing that you want to look at here is going to be libido. So if our libido is low, again, not necessarily high libido, I would say if you have very high libido, again, it's probably not the worst thing in the world. I couldn't really imagine. The only thing I could potentially see with very high libido would be like, that means that maybe testosterone levels for women are very high potentially, right? But outside of that, I don't really see where extra high libido could be problematic. Again, I could be wrong on that, but too low libido where like you're in your late 20s, early 30s, into your 40s, even 50s, maybe even to our 60s. If we do have, like, if you're seeing your libido trend down, yeah, maybe some of that is going to happen as you age, things like that. But I also think that that's a sign that we need to dial in things. And this is one thing I didn't mention, but as we age, these are probably going to be things that we'd want to pay attention to even more. And not necessarily pay attention to more, but we have to be more intentional with what we're doing, unfortunately, as we age. I do try and say that all the time in my content of like in your 20s, like you could do whatever and it really didn't matter. Whereas like as you get older, like things do start to become less responsive. You still have the choice to work on these things and fix them, but our body is likely less resilient as we age. But again, low libido is a clear sign of excess stress somewhere in the system. So this could be too much or too little training. Again, for people that are training like 3 to 4 days a week, you probably don't need to worry about this. If you think you're training too much, then it becomes more of a recovery issue than anything. But diet-induced stress is going to be huge. So we're talking very large deficits, extreme deficits, large amounts of weight loss in a short amount of time, trying to stay too lean. Again, relative to you, right? Because I do think that there's generalities of what's too lean, but also it is very individual on the person, as I mentioned. So again, diet-induced stress is going to be huge here. So what does that mean? And can we do there with that? Well, this just goes to show the importance of not always fat loss dieting or being low calorie. Micronutrient deficiencies. If we're lacking certain micronutrients, that is definitely going to be something where, again, that's a stressor on the body. And you may find that something like your libido will go down when you're not doing that. Now, how would that show up? What's a practical thing there from a micronutrient deficiency standpoint? One, it's like, obviously you're at a higher risk if you are fat loss dieting because you're just bringing in less calories. I would say this happens more if you eat literally the same thing day in and day out. If you have some sort of restrictiveness in your diet in terms of, hey, I'm vegan, or I just eat low carb, or something like, or just carnivore, right? Like that's where some of these micronutrient deficiencies would start to creep up. Again, a high alcohol intake, there could be that. And then a high training load as well too would be something where there could be some micronutrient deficiencies. But again, poor sleep or circadian disruption is going to be another thing here that could impact your libido. I guess one thing I would also add to this list would be your environment in terms of looking at your exposures to, and again, this is, I hate to like too much stock into this because But again, too much like endocrine disrupting chemicals, right? EDCs, a lot of plastics, stuff like that. Like and then certain cosmetics that you use, like definitely check those and see that could be something on there. But again, these are going to be the big ones that we really have a lot of impact on. So just talking about here with libido, that means there's just excess stress somewhere in the system and we need to look at what's going on there. But again, those are the most common, right? Too much or too little training, diet induced stress. So really deficits there, chronic deficits, lean body weight, but even high body fat levels too, right? So again, body fat levels are going to play a massive role here in this. Micronutrient deficiencies, poor sleep, and then circadian disruption. Those will all impact your libido and a sign that we need to look into something there. Again, next is going to be menstrual cycle. So a healthy menstrual cycle is a sign that the body is in a good place. Irregular or missing cycles are often a sign of excess stress, whether it's lifestyle, nutrition, training, or diet induced. So again, all the things I've mentioned so far would be the same thing here that we'd want to look into from a menstrual cycle standpoint. Again, this can start to get impacted when one, someone's on birth control, but then two, as women get into that perimenopause range, this can get a little noisy, right? It's like, is it perimenopause or is it what we're doing? And that's where in this situation, I would look at all the other things. And unfortunately, again, somebody in perimenopause is probably going to have to be more intentional with all these things and really paying attention to them. And unfortunately, we have to dial those in there. But again, that is going to be a time where this could get somewhat dysregulated. Again, if you're a female in her early 30s, mid 30s, late 30s, so 30s throughout early 40s, and you're having menstrual cycle dysregulation, you definitely want to see what's going on there. Again, this isn't that you need to go and get a bunch of tests done. It's just, hey, there's probably something from a lifestyle perspective, circadian disruption, not enough sleep, chronic dieting, not getting in enough micronutrients. Your training's either too much or too little. And then again, like just irregular meal timing, poor nutrition overall. These will all be things that could impact that. Another thing you'd want to look at is gut health and digestion. Bloating, constipation, poor stool quality, or discomfort are signs something is off. Right? And again, there's a huge stress component to this. There's also sleep or circadian health, and then nutrition is going to have a big role in this, right? So I just did my deep dive into gut health basics for someone that's body comp focused. And again, that was one of the things I really talked about was your gut health is off, then there's a sign that something needs to be taken care of. So definitely go back and look at that. That episode was released on Monday. So it was just 2 episodes ago. So I believe that might be should be 697 there. But again, there's a huge stress component to this, right? So in this case, if you are having gut issues, like we would definitely want to get that stress under control there. And then obviously look at nutrition things. Another one is how often you get sick. You should not be getting sick regularly. If this is the case, it's a sign that the immune system is downregulated, and it usually involves all 3 factors, right? Some sort of exercise where, again, we're exercising too much relative to our recovery and our nutrition, or we're not exercising enough, we're not moving enough. Lifestyle, again, poor circadian health, not getting enough sleep, high stress load on the body. And then obviously nutrition too, right? When we say nutrition, again, poor diet quality, but then also like under eating, missing out on certain micronutrients, things like that can be problematic. So again, if we're getting sick regularly, obviously if you have little ones and they go to school, stuff like you pick up some sicknesses that way, okay, that's going to happen from time to time. But again, if you're finding yourself getting sick multiple times throughout the year, definitely a sign that something is off. And this is it would impact your body composition, right? Directly, in the sense that it's directly going to impact it in that you're not able to train during that time. The recovery process, yeah, I always find that when clients get sick, it's like a month-long process where like things just get out of whack there. And I've just found that people that get sick regularly, it is really hard to get them into a good routine with things if they're constantly getting sick. But again, if that's the case, we have to trace it back to there's something that's missing, and that's also impacting your ability to change your body composition. Again, directly in the sense that, hey, you're not going to train and make as good of choices during that time. Your body's focused on recovery. But then again, indirectly of if this keeps happening, that means we're missing something that is probably going to impact our body composition. Skin, hair, and nail health. So again, this can reflect deficiencies, poor diet quality, chronic dieting, high stress load, or poor recovery. So again, it comes back to we could be missing out on certain nutrients, right? We're just trying to restrict our calories. We're not really focused on this. Again, a good example of this would be someone that is taking a GLP-1. You just eat less. You don't really focus on what you're eating. You're not strategic with your nutrition. You just eat less calories, smaller meals. Again, that's good from a calorie standpoint, but now we're probably missing out on certain micronutrients. Again, a poor diet quality, again, chronic dieting comes back to those nutrient deficiencies, but also, again, something like a thyroid is going to be downregulated if we're constantly dieting, trying to lower our body weight. Again, a high stress on the body, which could be micronutrient deficiencies. It could be poor diet quality. It could be diet-induced stress, but it could also be high psychological stress, or again, just poor recovery overall. So again, if our skin, hair, nails are off, something's going on. We want to look into that, right? Because again, this is going to be something where whatever we're missing out on is probably indirectly impacting our body composition. Body temperature regulation, difficulty staying warm, cold hands and feet, or trouble regulating body temperature can reflect, again, micronutrient gaps, chronic dieting, and high overall stress load on the body. Typically, this is going to show up as some sort of iron deficiency or like a thyroid issue. But again, that thyroid issue low thyroid is going to come from the lifestyle factors. Like, again, is it from the fact that you're trying to chronically diet? Is it that you are missing out on certain micronutrients? Or is it, hey, you have a high stress load on the body and you have high stress right now that's impacting your thyroid, and that's going to impact your body temperature regulation there. But also, you lose body fat and you get fairly lean. Like you do start to feel cold fairly often. Again, that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's a sign that, hey, maybe we are just a bit too lean as well too. Joint pain and aches. So persistent joint pain, stiffness, or nagging aches can be a sign the body isn't recovering well. So again, this could be, hey, it can be a common mismatch between like training stress, overall stress load, circadian disruption, and nutrition. And if we're not fueling our body with the right foods, high quality foods, things like that could start to that can increase your inflammation, right? Circadian disruption is going to increase your inflammation. High overall stress load on the body is going to increase your inflammation. High training stress, again, relative to your recovery. Again, like I said, I think if someone's truly just training too much, you'd have to be training 6-7 days a week, doing a lot. So again, we're talking people that do like endurance type events, things like that. And so in that situation, it could just be training itself that's the issue. Again, it could be like just poorly programmed training as well too. But generally speaking, if someone's doing too much training, it's probably more of a recovery issue than it is an actual, hey, you're training too much. I kind of explain that. But again, it could be something from a training perspective. And again, if our body's in that state, it's just not going to be as adaptable to want to change, lose body fat, and build muscle. And also this can show up too is if you do constantly have joint pain and aches, from an indirect standpoint, you're just not going to push your training as hard. And that can start to add up there. Again, so that doesn't mean we want to just like push through it. Definitely want to look into that. Resting heart rate's another good one to look at. Again, this is obviously objective, but again, this is a great indicator of overall stress and recovery. Higher than normal resting heart rate often signals under recovery. So this is higher than normal for you. And then I think anything over 60, 70 plus can indicate reduced recovery capacity. So again, it's like, okay, you're probably going to be at a higher risk of all these things popping up, at least one or two of them when our resting heart rate's that high. Plus, if it's this high, like higher for you than normal, again, good sign that these are going to pop up, right? You're probably under recovered. So again, we know that's elevated stress. So that could lead to hunger and cravings. We know that that's probably going to impact your energy levels, your motivation. If we're constantly in that sympathetic state, it's probably going to impact your libido because there's some stress on the body. Again, you could have some menstrual cycle dysregulations. It could impact your gut health, how often you get sick, because again, you're under recovered. All these things can show up with your resting heart rate being higher, general, and just higher than normal. And then it could be a sign that, hey, you're under recovered from a training perspective as well too. So we definitely want to look at a resting heart rate as more of a, again, objective measure, right? Because all these other ones are somewhat subjective there, right? Like I said, your menstrual cycle can be fairly objective, but there's still a little bit of subjectiveness that goes into that. So again, if something is off, your body is telling you something, right? So ignoring these signs is going to make body composition changes harder, and it can impact your long-term health. And I think it makes body comp change harder in direct ways, but then also indirect ways. So again, you take the hunger and cravings thing. It's like you just being hungry is not like the sign of, oh crap, making body composition change harder. It's again, what is the rating of the hunger? If it's consistently at a 5 and it's like all the time, then again, it's like we would need to look into like, is your nutrition inconsistent? Because again, that's probably impacting your body composition, right? Again, directly and indirectly. It's a sign that, hey, if it's a chronic diet issue, then your body comp's going to take a hit because you need to make sure that you're not just always fat loss dieting there, right? So again, there's a lot of direct and indirect things here that can impact it. And again, just pushing harder in training or slashing calories is usually not the answer, because again, usually when these things pop up, it's going to be like during times of maybe we're plateaued, maybe it's harder for us to make progress. And again, just pushing harder in training or slashing calories is probably not the answer for that. Again, it's like, hey, it comes back to the three things that I talked about of there's some sort of training issue, exercise movement issue, there's some sort of lifestyle habit issue, or a nutrition habit issue there. So again, pay attention to what your body is telling you, right? So this is exactly what I have my clients over 30 monitor weekly, right? Like I want to make sure these are like, we want to pay attention to these. Blood work is valuable and it can point us in the right direction. And so you can still use blood work and definitely use it and get it taken just to see, but how someone feels day to day is often the most important marker. So it's like, we don't even need blood work for this. Again, it's good to get, especially from like just being on the safe side with things, how someone feels is really the most important. And we need to make sure that's in a good spot because when something's off, like again, like your body is probably not going to be as responsive to change. And so it's going to feel like you have to really work uphill to get there. And usually when people work uphill to get there like that, it usually leads to issues there as well too. Again, what you do daily directly impacts your body, how your body responds, and your ability to sustain real progress. When you learn to listen and respond instead of just pushing through, changing and maintaining your body composition becomes easier, and your long-term health improves as well too in this process. So again, just a few more things to just keep in mind. Again, it's okay to not feel perfect every single day. One day of small ache and pain, no big deal. It's not like crap, I'm not going to be able to lose body fat or build muscle now. Like I said, your cycle being off one time, not really a big deal. It's just if it's consistently happening, we need to look into that a bit more. Again, you having a week where your libido's down a little bit, not a big deal. But if we're looking at 2, 3, 4 weeks, months on end where that's happening, definitely a sign that something needs to be improved there. And again, we can still make progress sometimes when these things are happening. It's just going to be a lot slower and a lot tougher. So to me, it's like you want to fix these things because, again, usually that thing that we would need to do is going to be the thing that will help you get into better body composition on the long term. So I hope this was helpful. Let me know if you guys have any questions on this topic. I can give me a follow on Instagram, Jeff, HOEHN_. Ask me any questions there. And then lastly, if you found this podcast be helpful in any way, if you could leave a rating and review, and that will help more people find it. That's it for now. I'll talk to you guys soon.